Sometimes we come across polynomials that have a negative in the leading coefficient. So what we need to learn how to do is factor out a negative value. And keep it straight, you can do it, but I can see why you might be confused coming on up. So let's factor out the greatest common factor, which is a 5 to both terms, but I'm going to factor out a negative 5 because my leading coefficient is negative. So let's rewrite each of these terms that include a negative 5 as a factor. So negative 5 times what produces that term? That's going to be an x squared. Then over here, let's factor out a negative 5. And what's left? Negative 5 times what makes a 30? That's going to be a negative 6. From there, we can factor out a negative 5. And then what I have left is I have an x squared minus a 6. So sometimes you might need to factor out a negative number, and where it gets confusing is when I'm trying to figure out a negative times what produces that number. So let me give you an example that we might be able to look at here a little bit. So the example we had, you notice that the leading coefficient is negative. So we want to factor out a negative greatest common factor. So that's going to be a negative we're going to factor out. Look at the coefficients. 6 is my greatest coefficient factor. A to the fourth, a squared, a cubed makes an a squared, and then I'm left with a b. So that's my greatest common factor, but I'm going to put a negative with it because my leading coefficient is negative. From there, what's the factor multiplied by this that produces that? That's going to be a 3, a squared, b squared, minus 6a squared b, because that's my greatest common factor. What's left with a b, then factoring out a negative 6a squared b from this guy leaves me with is that a 15? My greatest common factor is not a 6. Who told me it was a 6? It's a 3. All right, scratch that. Greatest common factor is a 3. So let's pull out a 3 out of these now. So I'm left with minus 3 a squared b. So in here then I have a 6 a squared b. Factor out a 3 a squared b, which leaves a 2 b. Factor out a negative 3 a squared b. And what I'm left with is it's got to be a negative 2b right here, because negative 3 times negative 2 produces a positive 6. Negative 3 times what makes negative 15? That's going to be a positive 5a, positive 5a. All right, let me just kind of cross this one out. A little bit of a mistake there. Factor out a negative 3a squared b from each of those terms, so I can factor that completely out. Then what's left is a 6a squared b minus a 2b plus, that is a positive 5a. Oh, I must have dropped something else in two. There looks like there's an a in there. All right, so I need to double check this. I think it's right, but let's just do a check and distribute it back across. This term times this produces a negative 18a to the fourth b squared. Oh, b cubed, so I dropped a b somewhere. Good thing I checked. So I have a b squared right here. Good thing you check. 3a squared times this produces a positive 6a squared b squared. And then multiplying these last two terms, that gives me a negative 15 a cubed b. Boy, that one gave me a little bit of trouble there, but good thing I checked. Good thing I went back and crossed off where I made my mistake and just kept going.